Modern agriculture likes to present itself as the peak of human intelligence. Satellites in orbit, algorithms predicting yields, synthetic inputs fine-tuned in laboratories, machines so large they reshape the landscape just by passing through it. The story we are told is simple: more technology equals more progress. But there is a growing contradiction that no amount of marketing can hide. The more advanced our agricultural systems become, the more fragile they seem. Soils lose structure and life, ecosystems simplify, production becomes dependent on external inputs, and the entire system starts to fail when any link in the chain breaks. This is not resilience, it is optimization pushed too far. What makes this uncomfortable is that this fragility is not inevitable. For most of human history, societies produced food at scale without synthetic fertilizers, without fossil fuels, without global supply chains, and without collapsing the land they depended on. These societies were not ignorant. They were observant, adaptive, and deeply aware of ecological limits. Their agricultural systems were not accidents. They were the result of centuries of trial, error, and refinement, shaped by direct feedback from the environment. In many regions, ancient farmers understood something modern systems often ignore. Soil is not just a medium to hold plants upright. It is a living system. Long before microscopes confirmed the existence of microorganisms, farmers observed that land treated with organic matter, rotation, and rest behaved differently. Crops grew stronger, water infiltration improved, pests were less catastrophic. These observations were not written in scientific journals, but they were encoded into practices passed down through generations. Take polyculture, for example. While modern agriculture favors monocultures for efficiency and mechanization, ancient systems often relied on diversity by default. Multiple crops grown together reduced risk. If one failed, another might succeed. Pests had a harder time spreading. Nutrients were cycled more efficiently. This was not ideology, it was survival logic. When failure meant starvation, redundancy was not optional. Terracing is another case where ancient engineering quietly outperforms modern shortcuts. In mountainous regions across Asia and South America, farmers reshaped entire landscapes to control erosion and water flow. These terraces were not just physical structures. They were hydrological systems, managing rainfall, reducing runoff, and preserving soil fertility over centuries. Many of these terraces are still productive today, while modern fields on similar slopes degrade within decades. Water management might be the clearest example of forgotten intelligence. Ancient irrigation systems were designed to work with seasonal cycles, not against them. Flood-based agriculture in river valleys enriched soils with sediments instead of washing nutrients away. In arid regions, systems like conduits transported water underground, minimizing evaporation and preserving scarce resources. These solutions were elegant, energy efficient, and astonishingly durable. Modern agriculture often treats nature as an adversary to be controlled. Ancient systems treated it as a framework to be understood. That difference in mindset matters. When farmers observed patterns rather than forcing uniformity, their systems became adaptive. When droughts came, fields did not immediately collapse. When pests arrived, they did not spread unchecked across endless monocultures. The system absorbed shocks instead of amplifying them. This does not mean ancient agriculture was perfect or universally sustainable. Some societies did degrade their environments. Some collapsed, but the ones that endured for centuries left behind a blueprint that modern agriculture rarely studies seriously. Instead of asking why these systems worked, we often dismiss them as primitive and irrelevant to a high-tech world. That dismissal is becoming harder to justify. As climate variability increases and input costs rise, modern agriculture is being forced to confront its own limitations. Precision tools can optimize efficiency, but they cannot create resilience on their own. Data can tell us what is happening, but it cannot fix systems designed without ecological buffers. The irony is that many of the new ideas gaining attention today are ancient in origin. Regenerative practices, soil health, cover cropping, agroforestry, and integrated systems are not revolutionary concepts. They are rediscoveries. The language has changed, the tools have improved, but the underlying principles are old. Diversity over uniformity, cycles over linear extraction, observation over brute force. The real question is not whether ancient agricultural knowledge is relevant today. It is whether modern systems are humble enough to learn from it. Because progress is not about abandoning the past. Sometimes it is about realizing that the future was already tested, quietly, by people who had no margin for error. One of the biggest mistakes modern agriculture makes is assuming that scale automatically means superiority. Bigger fields, bigger machines, bigger yields per hectare. On paper, this looks efficient. In reality, it creates systems that are optimized for stability that no longer exists. Ancient agricultural societies did not think in terms of maximum output. They thought in terms of continuity. The goal was not to extract the most in a single season, but to ensure the land could feed the next generation. This difference in objectives changed everything. Instead of pushing soil to its limits, ancient farmers built systems that regenerated themselves. Crop residues were returned to the land. Animals were integrated, not isolated. Nutrients cycled locally instead of being imported from far away. Waste did not exist as a concept. Everything had a place in the system. Agroforestry is a perfect example of this long-term thinking. Long before it became a buzzword in sustainability conferences, trees were intentionally integrated into farming systems across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Trees provided shade, stabilized soil, fixed nitrogen, regulated microclimates, and produced food, fodder, or materials. These systems created vertical complexity, turning farms into layered ecosystems rather than flat production surfaces. Modern agriculture often removed trees to simplify mechanization, assuming that uniformity would increase efficiency. What it actually did was expose soil to erosion, increase water stress, and eliminate natural pest regulation. The solution then became more inputs, more irrigation, more pesticides, more fertilizers. A cycle of dependency replaced a system of balance. Ancient farmers also understood timing in a way modern systems struggle with. Planting and harvesting were synchronized with ecological signals rather than rigid calendars. Seasonal patterns, animal behavior, and subtle environmental cues informed decisions. This flexibility allowed systems to adapt to variability instead of breaking under it. Today, standardized schedules maximize short-term efficiency but reduce adaptability when conditions shift. Another overlooked aspect is energy efficiency. Ancient agricultural systems ran almost entirely on solar energy captured through plants, with human and animal labor as the primary converters. Modern agriculture is deeply dependent on fossil energy at every stage: production, fertilization, harvesting, processing, and transport. This dependency is rarely questioned because it is embedded into the system itself. When energy prices rise or supply chains break, productivity becomes vulnerable. Ancient systems, by contrast, were constrained by local resources, which forced efficiency and innovation within limits. Those limits acted as safeguards. Modern systems removed many of those constraints, and in doing so, removed the feedback mechanisms that once prevented collapse. Soil structure is another area where ancient practices quietly outperform modern ones. Continuous tillage, heavy machinery, and chemical dependence degrade soil aggregation over time. Ancient systems minimized disturbance not because of ideology, but because disturbing soil too much reduced productivity. Over generations, farmers learned which practices maintained soil strength, water retention, and fertility. This accumulated knowledge did not exist as abstract theory. It was embedded in rituals, traditions, and cultural norms. While modern observers often dismiss these elements as unscientific, they functioned as memory systems. They preserved ecological knowledge across generations without formal documentation. When modern agriculture replaced these systems, it gained speed but lost memory. The loss of memory is critical. Without historical feedback, mistakes are repeated at scale. When a modern agricultural practice fails, it often fails everywhere at once. Ancient systems failed locally, adapted, and evolved. Diversity between regions acted as insurance against widespread collapse. What we are seeing now is not the failure of technology itself, but the failure of design philosophy. Technology was layered onto systems that ignored ecological principles. Ancient agriculture worked not because it rejected innovation, but because innovation was constrained by observation and necessity. Reintegrating ancient wisdom does not mean abandoning modern tools. It means using technology to enhance resilience instead of replacing it. Precision agriculture, data analytics, and genetics can be powerful allies, but only if they operate within systems designed to regenerate rather than extract. The uncomfortable truth is that many modern solutions are trying to fix problems that ancient systems never created in the first place. Soil erosion, nutrient runoff, pest explosions, and water scarcity are not natural outcomes of farming. They are design flaws. Understanding this forces a hard question. If ancient societies, with limited tools and no global safety net, could build agricultural systems that lasted centuries. Why are modern systems struggling after a few decades? The answer is not a lack of intelligence. It is a lack of humility. Modern agriculture often frames itself as data-driven and evidence-based, yet it routinely ignores one of the richest datasets ever produced: long-term survival. Ancient agricultural systems were stress-tested for centuries under real conditions: droughts, floods, pests, population pressure, climate shifts. Systems that failed disappeared, systems that worked endured. That alone makes them worth studying, not as nostalgia, but as proof of concept. One reason this knowledge was sidelined is that it does not scale cleanly inside industrial logic. Ancient systems were place-specific. They evolved in response to local soils, climates, water availability, and biological interactions. Modern agriculture, by contrast, seeks standardization. The same crop, the same inputs, the same machinery, replicated across vast regions. Standardization simplifies management, but it erases local intelligence. This erasure has consequences. When farming systems ignore local context, they become dependent on external correction. Poor soil is fixed with fertilizer. Water stress is fixed with irrigation. Pest pressure is fixed with chemicals. Each fix treats a symptom, not a cause. Over time, the system becomes a patchwork of interventions that must be continuously maintained to prevent failure. Ancient systems worked differently. Instead of correcting problems after they appeared, they were designed to prevent them from emerging at scale. Nutrient cycling reduced the need for external inputs. Biological diversity limited pest outbreaks. Landscape design controlled water flow naturally. These systems were not optimized for maximum yield under perfect conditions. They were optimized for acceptable yield under imperfect ones. This difference becomes critical under climate uncertainty. Modern agriculture assumes predictability. Planting schedules, input timing, and logistics depend on relatively stable patterns. As climate variability increases, this assumption breaks down. Extreme events expose how brittle highly optimized systems can be. Ancient systems, built under uncertainty, often absorb shocks more effectively because they expect variability rather than deny it. Another overlooked factor is knowledge ownership. In ancient societies, agricultural knowledge was decentralized. Farmers were experimenters. Techniques evolved through shared experience, observation, and adaptation. Failure produced learning. Today, much agricultural knowledge is centralized, proprietary, and disconnected from the land itself. Decisions are increasingly driven by models, recommendations, and products developed far from the field. This separation creates a feedback delay. When a practice degrades soil or reduces resilience, the consequences may take years to appear. By then, the system has already locked itself into a dependency loop. Ancient farmers could not afford this delay. Feedback was immediate. Poor decisions had visible consequences within a generation. There is also a social dimension modern systems tend to ignore. Ancient agriculture was embedded in community structures. Labor, risk, and resources were shared. This social integration increased resilience. When one farmer failed, the system did not immediately collapse. Modern agriculture often isolates producers, concentrating risk on individuals while distributing profit upward through supply chains. Technology promised to liberate farmers from uncertainty. In many cases, it replaced ecological risk with financial risk. Inputs must be purchased, debt must be serviced, margins become thin. A bad season is no longer just a yield problem. It becomes a systemic threat. Ancient systems were not free of hardship, but they were less exposed to cascading failure driven by external dependencies. What makes this moment unique is that modern science is finally catching up to what ancient systems intuitively understood. Soil biology, microbial networks, nutrient cycling, and ecosystem services are now measurable and quantifiable. The irony is that science is often used to validate practices that already existed, rather than to question why they were abandoned in the first place. The narrative of progress assumes a linear path. Old methods are replaced by new ones, which are always better. Agriculture does not follow this pattern. It is cyclical. Knowledge is gained, forgotten, rediscovered, and renamed. The danger is assuming that novelty equals improvement. Ancient agricultural wisdom is not a blueprint to be copied blindly. It is a set of principles tested under constraint. Resilience over efficiency, diversity over uniformity, integration over isolation, long-term function over short-term output. These principles are not outdated. They are increasingly necessary. The challenge is cultural as much as technical. It requires redefining success. Yield alone is not enough. Profit alone is not enough. A system that produces today but degrades tomorrow is not successful. Ancient societies understood this implicitly because they lived inside the consequences of their decisions. Modern agriculture has the tools ancient farmers never had. The mistake would be using those tools to reinforce fragile systems instead of redesigning them. The future of agriculture will not be built by rejecting technology or romanticizing the past. It will be built by combining ancient intelligence with modern capability, under a different set of priorities. If agriculture is to remain viable in a changing world, it must recover its memory. Not as tradition, not as ideology, but as design logic. Because the land does not care how advanced a system looks. It only responds to how it is treated. One of the strongest illusions in modern agriculture is control. The belief that with enough inputs, data, and technology, nature can be fully managed. Ancient agricultural systems never operated under this illusion. They assumed unpredictability as a constant. Weather would change, pests would adapt, soils would respond over time. Instead of trying to eliminate uncertainty, they designed systems that could function within it. This mindset shaped how landscapes were used. Ancient farmers did not force every piece of land into production. Marginal areas were left as buffers. Wetlands, forests, and uncultivated zones played functional roles, regulating water, supporting biodiversity, and stabilizing microclimates. These areas were not seen as wasted space. They were infrastructure. Modern agriculture often removes these buffers in pursuit of efficiency. Hedgerows are cleared, wetlands are drained, field edges are flattened. The immediate result is more plantable area. The long-term result is increased vulnerability. Without buffers, disturbances spread faster and hit harder. Floods become destructive, droughts become absolute, pest populations expand without resistance. Ancient systems also respected ecological thresholds. They recognized that pushing land beyond certain limits produced diminishing returns. Instead of escalating effort indefinitely, they shifted practices. Fields were rested, crops were rotated, land use intensity changed over time. This dynamic management allowed ecosystems to recover and prevented permanent degradation. Contrast this with modern systems that rely on constant pressure. Continuous cropping, constant input application, and year-round production leave little room for recovery. When degradation appears, it is often treated as a technical problem rather than a design failure. More fertilizer, more irrigation, more intervention. The system becomes locked into escalation. Another critical difference lies in how risk was distributed. Ancient agriculture diversified risk spatially and biologically. Different crops, different plots, different management strategies. Failure in one area did not guarantee failure everywhere. Modern agriculture often concentrates risk through specialization. Entire regions depend on a single crop or production model. When that model fails, the impact is systemic. This concentration is efficient under stable conditions and catastrophic under unstable ones. As climate volatility increases, the cost of specialization rises. Ancient systems implicitly priced this risk. They accepted lower peak yields in exchange for stability across time. Modern systems often do the opposite, prioritizing maximum output under ideal conditions while ignoring tail risks. There is also the issue of adaptation speed. Ancient systems adapted slowly but continuously. Small changes were tested over generations. Successful practices spread organically. Failed ones disappeared. Modern agriculture can change rapidly, but often in large, coordinated shifts driven by policy, markets, or technology adoption. When these shifts are wrong, the consequences scale quickly. This is where the idea of resilience becomes more than a buzzword. Resilience is not about resisting change. It is about absorbing it. Ancient agricultural systems were flexible by design. Modern systems often confuse rigidity with strength. Highly optimized systems perform well within narrow parameters but fail outside them. The irony is that many modern resilience strategies are retrofits. Cover crops to repair soil structure. Biological inputs to reduce chemical dependence. Landscape restoration to manage water. These are attempts to rebuild functions that ancient systems preserved from the beginning. The cost of rebuilding is always higher than the cost of maintaining. Technology itself is not the enemy. The problem is how it is deployed. When technology is used to override ecological feedback, it accelerates degradation. When it is used to enhance observation and decision-making within ecological limits, it becomes powerful. Ancient farmers relied on direct observation. Modern tools can expand that capacity exponentially if used with the right intent. The real barrier is not technical. It is conceptual. Modern agriculture often measures success in seasons. Ancient systems measured success in generations. This difference in time horizon changes every design decision. Short-term optimization rewards extraction. Long-term thinking rewards regeneration. As environmental and economic pressures intensify, the gap between these approaches becomes harder to ignore. Systems designed for control struggle under chaos. Systems designed for adaptation endure. Ancient agriculture was not backward. It was cautious in a world that punished mistakes harshly. The future of agriculture will be shaped by how quickly modern systems can relearn this lesson. Control is seductive, but it is fragile. Adaptation is less impressive, less visible, and far more durable. The land responds to systems that listen, not systems that dominate. At some point, the question stops being whether ancient agricultural wisdom is useful and becomes why it was ignored for so long. The answer is uncomfortable. Ancient systems do not fit neatly into narratives of progress driven by speed, scale, and short-term profit. They demand patience. They reward restraint. They force decision-makers to think beyond quarterly results and election cycles. Modern agriculture grew inside an industrial worldview. Nature was treated as a variable to be controlled, not a system to be partnered with. This worldview delivered extraordinary gains in productivity, but it also externalized costs. Soil degradation, water pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate vulnerability were pushed into the future, treated as someone else's problem. Ancient systems had no such luxury. Consequences were immediate and local. What is happening now is not a return to the past, but a reckoning with design limits. As environmental pressure increases, the margin for error shrinks. Systems built on continuous correction struggle when correction becomes too expensive, too slow, or too uncertain. Ancient agricultural systems were designed to minimize the need for correction in the first place. This is why the most forward-looking agricultural innovations today often look backward at first glance. Regenerative farming, agroecology, and landscape-based management borrow heavily from ancient principles, even when they are presented in modern language. The difference is not the philosophy. It is the toolkit. Today, we can measure soil carbon, monitor water dynamics, and model ecosystems in ways ancient farmers never could. The opportunity is to combine this capability with their design logic. The danger lies in superficial adoption. Adding cover crops or reducing tillage without changing system goals turns ancient wisdom into a marketing layer rather than a structural shift. Ancient systems worked because every component reinforced the others. Diversity supported resilience. Cycles maintained fertility. Buffers absorbed shocks. Removing one element weakened the whole. Real integration requires redefining success metrics. Yield must be balanced with soil function. Efficiency must be weighed against resilience. Profit must be evaluated over decades, not seasons. These are not technical challenges. They are cultural and economic ones. Ancient agricultural societies understood that food production was not separate from social stability. When land failed, societies fractured. That connection is less visible today, but no less real. Modern supply chains mask fragility until they break. When they do, the consequences propagate rapidly across regions and populations. The idea that ancient agriculture was inefficient misses the point. It was efficient at what mattered most: persistence. It optimized for survival under uncertainty. In a world facing climate volatility, resource constraints, and ecological limits, this kind of efficiency becomes strategic. The future of agriculture will not be defined by how advanced our machines become, but by how intelligently we design systems. Ancient farmers did not have the option to ignore feedback. Modern agriculture often does. That privilege is fading. Recovering ancient agricultural wisdom does not mean romanticizing the past or rejecting science. It means acknowledging that some of the most sophisticated solutions ever developed were created without formal theory, under pressure, through observation and humility. Those qualities are not outdated. They are rare. If modern agriculture can learn to value resilience as much as productivity, memory as much as innovation, and systems as much as outputs, it can move beyond crisis management and toward durability. The land does not need more control. It needs better design. In the end, the most radical idea in agriculture may not be new technology, but an old realization. Farming is not about dominating nature. It is about learning how to stay. One aspect rarely discussed when comparing ancient and modern agriculture is failure tolerance. Ancient systems assumed failure as part of reality. Crops would fail sometimes. Yields would fluctuate. Seasons would surprise. Instead of designing systems that collapsed under failure, they designed systems that survived it. This distinction matters more than it seems. Modern agriculture often treats failure as an anomaly, a deviation from the expected output curve. When yields drop, the response is immediate correction, more inputs, emergency measures, financial buffering. The system is built to avoid failure at all costs, which paradoxically makes it less capable of handling it when it inevitably occurs. Ancient farmers accepted that some losses were unavoidable. What they refused to accept was total collapse. This is why redundancy was embedded everywhere. Multiple crops served similar nutritional roles. Different planting times spread risk. Landscapes were fragmented intentionally. This reduced efficiency in perfect conditions but dramatically increased survival in bad ones. This mindset aligns closely with modern system theory. Highly optimized systems are brittle. Systems with slack, redundancy, and diversity are resilient. Ancient agriculture was resilient by necessity. Modern agriculture is efficient by design. The tension between these goals is now becoming unavoidable. Another dimension where ancient systems quietly excelled is nutrient logic. Modern agriculture relies on linear nutrient flows. Inputs are extracted, processed, applied, harvested, and lost. The system assumes constant replenishment. Ancient systems were circular. Nutrients returned to the soil through residues, composting, animal integration, and natural deposition. Losses existed, but they were minimized. This circularity reduced dependence on external sources and stabilized productivity over time. Modern systems compensate for broken cycles with industrial inputs, which works until it doesn't. When inputs become expensive, scarce, or environmentally constrained, the weakness of linear systems becomes obvious. Ancient societies also understood spatial intelligence. Not every crop belonged everywhere. Land use followed gradients. Fertile lowlands, dry uplands, floodplains, and forests all had distinct roles. Modern agriculture often flattens these distinctions, forcing uniform production models onto heterogeneous landscapes. This increases short-term output but amplifies long-term stress. The cost of ignoring spatial variation is paid through erosion, waterlogging, salinization, and yield instability. Ancient systems respected limits not because of ideology, but because violating them produced visible damage within a lifetime. Modern systems often defer that damage beyond immediate accountability. There is also an epistemological gap. Ancient agricultural knowledge was empirical, iterative, and embodied. It lived in practice, not abstraction. Modern agricultural knowledge is often abstracted, quantified, and generalized. This allows scalability, but it also removes nuance. What works statistically may fail locally. Bridging this gap requires more than importing old practices. It requires changing how knowledge flows. Farmers must regain agency as adaptive decision-makers, not just operators of prescribed systems. Ancient farmers were not technicians following manuals. They were observers embedded in feedback loops. This matters because no model can fully predict complex ecological interactions. Climate change increases uncertainty. Biological systems respond nonlinearly. Ancient systems accepted this uncertainty as fundamental. Modern systems often attempt to eliminate it through control, which becomes increasingly expensive and ineffective. What we are witnessing today is not the end of industrial agriculture, but the end of its dominance as the unquestioned model. Hybrid systems are emerging. Some combine precision technology with regenerative principles. Others reintroduce diversity and landscape design while maintaining mechanization. These hybrids succeed when ancient logic guides modern tools, not the other way around. The mistake would be assuming this transition is automatic. It is not. Industrial incentives reward scale, uniformity, and short-term output. Ancient principles reward patience, diversity, and long-term stability. Aligning these requires intentional redesign at economic, policy, and cultural levels. Ancient agriculture was not conservative by choice. It was cautious because reality demanded it. As environmental constraints tighten, modern agriculture is being forced into the same posture. Caution is no longer optional. It is strategic. Another dimension where ancient agricultural systems quietly outperformed modern ones is decision latency. Ancient farmers operated with immediate feedback. A bad practice showed consequences in soil structure, water behavior, or crop health within seasons. This tight feedback loop forced constant adjustment. Modern agriculture often operates with delayed feedback. Soil degradation, biodiversity loss, and nutrient imbalance accumulate slowly, masked by chemical correction and external inputs. By the time the system signals distress, reversal becomes expensive or impossible. This delay creates a dangerous illusion of success. High yields today are interpreted as proof of sustainability, even when underlying system health is declining. Ancient systems did not have this luxury. When productivity dropped, there was no external rescue. Adaptation was mandatory. That pressure produced conservative but durable design choices. There is also the matter of scale cognition. Ancient agriculture scaled through replication, not expansion. Similar systems adapted to different regions, each tuned locally. Modern agriculture scales through expansion, pushing the same model across vast territories. This creates efficiency, but it also synchronizes failure. When conditions shift, entire regions suffer simultaneously. Ancient systems fragmented risk by default. Modern systems aggregated. Modern agricultural economics further complicates the problem. Incentives reward yield, speed, and uniformity. Ecological health is often treated as secondary, optional, or external. Ancient agricultural societies had no separation between ecology and economy. If the land failed, the economy failed. This tight coupling enforced discipline. Today, subsidies, insurance, and global trade soften the immediate consequences of ecological damage. This creates moral hazard at scale. Practices that degrade systems can persist because costs are displaced spatially or temporally. Ancient systems could not externalize failure. They paid immediately. This difference explains why ancient agriculture often appears slow. It was slow because it optimized for continuity. Modern systems appear fast because they borrow against the future. Speed is not inherently bad, but borrowed stability always comes due. As environmental limits tighten, the cost of this debt rises. Another overlooked strength of ancient agriculture was epistemic humility. Ancient farmers did not assume complete understanding. They observed patterns and adjusted behavior. Modern agriculture often operates under the assumption that systems are fully modelable. This confidence drives large-scale interventions based on incomplete knowledge. Complex biological systems do not behave linearly. Small changes can trigger disproportionate effects. Ancient systems evolved cautiously because experimentation carried existential risk. Modern systems experiment aggressively because consequences are buffered. That buffer is eroding. As climate systems destabilize, predictive power weakens. Models become less reliable. Under these conditions, adaptive systems outperform predictive ones. Ancient agriculture was adaptive by necessity. Modern agriculture must relearn this posture. The shift required is philosophical as much as technical. From prediction to preparedness, from control to responsiveness. What emerges from studying ancient agricultural systems is not a list of techniques, but a framework for thinking. Systems were designed around constraints rather than fantasies of limitless input. Energy was scarce, labor was valuable, land was irreplaceable. These constraints forced efficiency in the deepest sense. Modern agriculture temporarily removed many constraints, but did not remove ecological limits. It simply delayed them. As those limits reassert themselves, systems designed without constraint awareness struggle. Ancient agriculture assumed permanence. Modern agriculture often assumes replaceability. If soil degrades, inputs compensate. If land fails, production shifts. This logic works until it doesn't. There are finite places left to shift toward. The future will belong to systems that assume they must remain where they are and function indefinitely. In the end, ancient agricultural wisdom is not about nostalgia. It is about realism. These systems were forged under conditions where failure meant extinction, not inconvenience. They survived not because they were perfect, but because they were honest about limits. Modern agriculture is entering a similar phase. Climate instability, resource constraints, and ecological degradation remove the illusion of infinite correction. Under these conditions, ancient principles become competitive advantages. The choice is not between old and new. It is between fragile efficiency and durable intelligence. Technology can amplify either. The deciding factor is system design. If agriculture continues to optimize for short-term output while ignoring system health, collapse becomes a matter of timing. If it recenters resilience, diversity, and feedback, it can evolve rather than break. Ancient farmers did not call this sustainability. They called it survival. And survival, in the end, is the most advanced strategy there is.